10 minutes, the CEO said, her voice cool enough to quiet an entire glass showroom. That is all I am giving the man no one invited. Ethan Miller stood beneath the white lights of Whitmore Motors with a scratch toolbox in one hand and oil beneath his fingernails, while 50 executives, investors, and engineers stared at him like he had walked into the wrong life. In the center of the marble floor sat the car that had become a legend for all the wrong reasons, a deep red Ferrari worth $2 million, polished until it looked alive, silent until it felt cursed. For 5 years, it had not started. Not once. Specialists had flown in from Italy, Germany, California, and New York. Computers had scanned it, experts had argued over it, and wealthy men in tailored suits had promised miracles, only to leave with nothing but embarrassed smiles and unpaid pride. Now a single dad from a small repair shop outside Dayton, Ohio, was standing beside it in a faded denim jacket, and the room could barely hide its laughter. Grant Holloway, Whitmore Motors' head of advanced engineering, stepped forward with a grin that had too much polish and not enough kindness. Ms. Whitmore, with respect, we have had factory teams fail on this vehicle. Are we really handing a $2 million Ferrari to a man who fixes pickup trucks? A few people chuckled. Ethan did not look at them. He only set his toolbox down softly, as if noise itself deserved respect. Charlotte Whitmore stood near the car with her arms folded, white suit sharp as a winter morning, blonde hair pinned back, blue eyes unreadable. She was 35, powerful, and tired in a way money could not cover. Mr. Miller, she said, do you understand what this car is? Ethan looked at the Ferrari, not at her. Yes, ma'am. Grant laughed under his breath. That would be a first. Ethan crouched beside the driver's side door. The showroom lights hummed above him. Somewhere, a phone camera clicked on. The air smelled like leather, waxed stone, and expensive impatience. He placed one calloused hand on the hood, not dramatically, not for show, but gently, the way a father touches a child's forehead to check for fever. I don't need 10 minutes, he said. Grant tilted his head. Excuse me? Ethan leaned closer, listening to something no one else thought to hear. If I'm wrong, I'll leave in 5. The laughter came quicker this time, sharper, bouncing off the glass walls. Charlotte's expression did not change, but her eyes moved to his hand. There was no arrogance in him. No performance. Only quiet. Only dignity. Ethan closed his eyes for one breath while the room waited for him to fail. Then he opened them and whispered, almost to himself, I know that sound. Charlotte stepped forward. What sound? Ethan did not answer right away. His thumb traced the edge of the hood near the old Ferrari badge, and something passed across his face, a shadow of memory, a grief so brief most people missed it. But Charlotte saw it. Grant saw only a mechanic wasting time. There is no sound. Grant snapped. That is the problem. Ethan finally looked up, calm as still water. No. The problem is everyone kept trying to make it speak before asking why it went silent. The room thinned into a strange quiet. Even the people holding phones lowered them slightly. Charlotte's jaw tightened, not in anger, but recognition. 5 years of experts had called the Ferrari broken. 5 years of reports had called it impossible. 5 years of her father's last machine had sat like a beautiful coffin in the middle of her empire. Ethan stood slowly, walked to the front of the car, and stared at the narrow seam beneath the hood. His breathing changed. Not fear. Not doubt. Something older. Something personal. Who worked on this car before your father died? He asked. Charlotte's face paled just enough for the room to notice. Grant's smile disappeared for half a second. That is none of your concern, Grant said. Ethan kept his eyes on the Ferrari. It is now. Charlotte took one step closer, her heels clicking once against the marble, and for the first time that morning, the CEO who owned the building sounded less like a ruler and more like a daughter. Why would you ask that? Ethan looked at the car as if it had just whispered from a grave. Because my father used to tune engines by ear. And this one is carrying. His silence. The question followed Ethan home long before the showroom ever let him leave. It followed him past the polished glass doors, past the men who still laughed behind their hands, past Charlotte Whitmore standing beside the silent Ferrari with something uncertain in her eyes. By 6:30 that evening, Ethan was back in his small rented house on the edge of Dayton, where the porch light flickered when the wind came hard across the road and the kitchen smelled faintly of tomato soup, laundry soap, and old motor oil. His daughter Lily sat at the table with a pencil behind her ear, working on a school project made from cardboard, tape, and more hope than supplies. She looked up the moment he stepped inside. Did they laugh at you again, Daddy? Ethan paused with one hand still on the doorknob. He wanted to say no. He wanted to protect her from the small cruelties adults dressed up as jokes. But Lily was 9 years old, and children who have lost a mother early learn to read silence before they learn long division. Ethan hung his jacket on the chair and smiled softly. A little. Lily frowned. Rich people do that weird thing where they smile with only their teeth. He let out a quiet breath that almost became a laugh. Some people do. She pushed her cardboard project aside. Why do they look at you like you are invisible? Ethan washed his hands at the sink, watching the gray water circle the drain. His fingers were cracked from work, his knuckles stained in places no soap could reach. Because sometimes invisible people see what everyone else misses. Lily considered that like it was a Bible verse, then nodded as if filing it somewhere safe. Their house was not much, 2 bedrooms, thin walls, a heater that clicked before it worked, and a backyard where weeds fought through the fence line. But it had warmth. It had photographs on the refrigerator. It had Lily's drawings taped above the stove, each one showing cars with smiling headlights and fathers who always came home. Ethan had once dreamed beyond this place. At 24, he had been the young mechanic everyone said would design engines, not just repair them. He had won scholarships, impressed old racers, and studied performance systems until blueprints felt like a second language. Then his wife got sick. Then the bills came. Then the world narrowed to hospital parking lots, school lunches, late shifts, and a little girl who needed one steady hand more than he needed applause. He did not regret choosing her. A man who confuses ambition with love can lose both. After dinner, Lily climbed onto a chair and pulled down a dusty metal box from the top shelf of the hallway closet. I found Grandpa Henry's stuff when I was looking for poster board, she said. Ethan turned too quickly. Careful with that. I was careful. She opened it with the reverence children use around things adults treat as sacred. Inside were old photographs, folded receipts, a cracked leather keychain, and sketches drawn in blue pencil on yellowing paper. Ethan's face changed when he saw them. His father's handwriting leaned across the margins, neat and firm, full of notes about timing, pressure, fuel mixture, and sound. Lily lifted one drawing and tilted it toward the lamp. This one looks fancy. Ethan stepped closer. The room seemed to quiet around him. The drawing showed the inner layout of a custom ignition system, more delicate than anything most garages ever touched. In the bottom corner was a symbol, a small hand-drawn mark shaped like a wing cutting through a circle. Ethan had seen that mark only once since childhood. On the red Ferrari in Charlotte Whitmore's showroom. Lily looked up, her voice small now. Daddy, why is Grandpa's drawing on that lady's car? Ethan did not answer. Outside, a truck passed slowly on the road, its headlights sliding across the kitchen wall like a memory trying to get in. He picked up the paper with both hands, and for the first time in years, the past did not feel buried. It felt waiting. By the time Ethan sat in his kitchen holding his father's old drawing, Charlotte Whitmore was still standing alone inside the private showroom on the top floor of Whitmore Motors, long after the executives had gone home and the cleaning crew had lowered their voices out of respect. The red Ferrari rested beneath a circle of soft white light, too perfect to look abandoned, too silent to feel alive. Charlotte had spent 5 years telling herself it was only a car. A rare machine. A family asset? A problem to be solved before the board turned it into another reason to question her leadership. But every time she stood near it after dark, when the building stopped pretending to be powerful, she felt like a daughter again. Her father, Richard Whitmore, had loved that car with the patience of a man who believed machines carried memory. He had bought it damaged, rebuilt it slowly, and driven it only on Sunday mornings along the quiet roads north of Columbus, where the trees leaned over the pavement and the world seemed honest for a few miles. Charlotte remembered being 12 years old in the passenger seat, her ponytail whipping in the open window, her father laughing as the engine sang through the hills. "Listen closely, Charlie," he would say, tapping the steering wheel with 2 fingers. "A machine tells the truth if you respect it enough to hear." She had forgotten that sentence until Ethan Miller said almost the same thing without knowing it. Now it would not leave her alone. She walked around the Ferrari with her heels clicking softly against the marble, then stopped near the driver's side. Her reflection stared back from the glass, sharp suit, controlled face, eyes too tired for 35. She had inherited $1 billion company, but inheritance was not the same as belonging. Some board members still treated her like a temporary keeper of her father's chair. Some smiled at her in meetings while preparing votes against her in private. Grant Holloway was the worst of them, loyal when watched, poisonous when comfortable. He called her visionary in public and emotional in closed rooms. The Ferrari had become his favorite weapon. Your father trusted sentiment too much. He had told her that morning. You cannot lead a company while worshipping a broken car. Charlotte had not answered him then. She had learned early that powerful women were punished twice, once for feeling and again for showing they had felt. So she became steel. She became schedules, signatures, quarterly growth, and cold decisions delivered. Without apology. But steel could not explain why the car had died the week her father died. Steel could not explain why no expert could revive it. Steel could not explain why a mechanic from Dayton had touched the hood once and spoken like he had heard a ghost. Near midnight, Charlotte unlocked a hidden file cabinet in her father's old office, a room she rarely entered because his leather chair still seemed to be waiting for him. The air smelled of cedar, old paper, and the faint tobacco scent he never fully admitted to. She pulled out the sealed folder labeled Ferrari Restoration, Year 5, then opened the archived security report from the last week of his life. Most of it was familiar: delivery logs, service notes, signatures from certified technicians. Then she found the still image. It was grainy, taken from a corner camera in the old restoration bay. Her father stood beside the Ferrari, smiling warmly at a man in a work shirt with rolled sleeves and silver at his temples. The man's face was turned slightly away, but his posture was unmistakable, quiet, steady, familiar in a way that made her breath catch. Below the image was a visitor entry, half faded but still readable. Henry Miller. Charlotte sat down slowly. The office around her seemed to lose its edges. 5 years of silence. 5 years of experts. 5 years of assuming the past had ended with her father. She touched a name on the page and whispered, "Who were you?" At that same hour, 20 miles away, Ethan stared at the same truth from the other side of grief, his father's drawing spread under a kitchen lamp, Lily asleep in the next room, and a small winged circle marked in blue pencil like a door either family had been brave enough to open. The next morning arrived with a pale gray sky over Dayton and a wind cold enough to make the flags outside Whitmore Motors snap against their poles. Ethan Miller drove through the front security gate in his old Ford truck, his father's blue pencil drawing folded inside the pocket of his denim jacket. Lily sat beside him with her backpack on her knees because school had a late start, and because Ethan had learned long ago that single fathers do not always get perfect options. "Are they going to be mean again?" she asked, watching the glass building grow taller through the windshield. Ethan kept both hands on the wheel. "Maybe." "What will you do?" "My job." She nodded, but her small fingers tightened around the strap of her backpack. Inside the restoration bay, the air was bright, polished, and unfriendly. Fluorescent lights buzzed above spotless workbenches. Tool cabinets shone red and silver. The Ferrari waited on a raised platform, surrounded by computers, cables, and men who looked more ready to judge than help. Grant Holloway stood near the hood with a paper cup of coffee and a smile that had practiced looking casual. "Well, this is charming," he said when Ethan walked in with Lily behind him. "Bring your apprentice to work day?" A few engineers laughed. Lily looked down at her sneakers. Ethan placed one hand gently on her shoulder and did not raise his voice. "She will sit quietly." Grant stepped closer, lowering his gaze to Ethan's battered toolbox. "That is not the issue. This is a restricted engineering bay, not a roadside garage." Charlotte Whitmore entered before Ethan could answer, wearing a navy coat over a cream blouse, her face composed but her eyes changed from the night before. She looked at Lily, then at Ethan. "She can stay in the observation area." Grant's smile tightened. "Charlotte, with respect, this is becoming unprofessional." "Then let us become professional," Charlotte said. The room quieted. Ethan said nothing, but he saw the folder tucked beneath her arm, and she saw the folded paper in his pocket. Neither mentioned Henry Miller. Not yet. Ethan washed his hands at the steel sink, rolled up his sleeves, and approached the Ferrari. Grant deliberately tossed a pair of thin shop gloves onto the workbench, where they landed beside a smear of black grease. "Try not to scratch history, mechanic." Ethan picked up the gloves, folded them once, and set them aside. "I need my hands." Grant scoffed. "Of course you do." Ethan ignored him. He opened the hood and leaned in, not reaching first for the diagnostic tablet, not plugging in any cable, not performing for the crowd. He checked the battery leads, then the relay housing, then the custom ignition line hidden beneath a polished cover. He touched each part lightly. He listened. The bay settled into the strange discomfort that comes when mockery runs out of easy fuel. One engineer whispered that he was wasting time. Another muttered that the system had already been mapped. Ethan continued. The smell inside the engine bay was faint but wrong: warm plastic, old fuel, and something metallic that should not have been there. He asked for a flashlight. No one moved. Charlotte took one from a nearby cart and handed it to him herself. Grant watched that small gesture like an insult. Ethan shone the beam beneath the ignition bracket and went still. "There it is," he said quietly. Grant laughed too fast. "There what is?" Ethan reached in with 2 fingers and touched a small connector no larger than a quarter, tucked behind a heat shield where a normal skin would not flag it. "This part does not belong here." Grant crossed his arms. "Every component in this vehicle has been verified by certified personnel." "Then certified personnel missed it." The words were calm, but they landed hard. Charlotte moved closer. "What does it do?" Ethan looked at the connector, then at the engine, then finally at Grant. "It interrupts the ignition signal just enough to make every test blame something else." One of the engineers frowned and leaned over the bay. Another stopped smiling. Grant's face sharpened. "That is speculation." Ethan shook his head. "No. Speculation is what people call truth before they are ready to measure it." The room went still. Lily watched from behind the glass, her hands pressed around the straps of her backpack, eyes wide not with fear, but with recognition. She had seen her father fix broken things all her life, but this was different. This was not just repair. This was a man hearing a buried voice. Ethan straightened, holding the flashlight low. "This car was not broken," he said. "It was silenced." Charlotte's breath caught, and for one quiet second, the great restoration bay with all its money, titles, and polished machines felt smaller than the truth beginning to rise inside it. The words stayed in the air long after Ethan said them, and for the first time, no one in the restoration bay seemed eager to fill the silence. Charlotte Whitmore stood beside the Ferrari with the flashlight still in her hand, staring at the hidden connector as if it were a small door into 5 years of grief. Grant Holloway recovered first, because pride often moves faster than wisdom. "This is theater," he said, setting his coffee down too hard. "A loose theory from a man who has not even reviewed the full service history." Ethan looked at him calmly. "Then show me the full service history." Grant's eyes narrowed. "That is above your access." Charlotte turned to him. "Not anymore." The room shifted again. Something in her voice had changed, not loud, not emotional, but final. Ethan did not smile. He simply reached into his jacket pocket and unfolded his father's drawing across the fender cover with a gentleness that made Lily press closer to the observation glass. The yellowed paper looked fragile beneath the bright white lights, its blue pencil lines aged but steady. One engineer leaned in despite himself. Another whispered, "That layout is almost identical." Ethan pointed to the winged circle mark in the corner. "My father drew this before I was born. He told me some engines were not built to impress people. They were built to carry promises." Charlotte's face softened in spite of herself. Lily, who had been quiet behind the glass, lifted her notebook and began sketching the same system from memory, copying the angle of the hidden line beneath the dashboard. She had watched her father study machines her whole life. She knew the way his eyes moved when something did not belong. Charlotte noticed the movement and walked toward her. "May I see that?" Lily hesitated, then looked at Ethan. He nodded once. She held up the notebook. The drawing was rough, childish in places, but one detail was sharper than the rest, a small bypass line behind the interior panel that none of the engineers had marked on their tablets. Charlotte stared at it. "How did you know to draw that?" Lily shrugged, embarrassed by the attention. "Grandpa Henry drew cars like that. Daddy says." Machines remember hands. The flashlight slipped slightly in Charlotte's fingers. Her father had said those words. Not exactly, but close enough that memory opened like a bruise. Machines tell the truth if you respect them enough to hear. Grant stepped between Charlotte and the glass. "She is a child. We are not basing a technical inquiry on crayon work." Lily's cheeks turned red. Ethan's posture changed before his voice did. He crossed the bay slowly, every step quiet against the polished floor, and stopped a few feet from Grant. "You can talk to me however you want," he said. "But not to my daughter." No one laughed. Grant looked around, expecting support, and found only uncomfortable faces. Charlotte moved past him, took Lily's notebook with care, and placed it beside Henry Miller's drawing on the protected fender cover. 2 drawings, one old and one new, lay beneath the same lights, separated by decades but joined by the same hidden truth. Ethan studied them together. His finger moved from Henry's blue pencil mark to Lily's small bypass line, then stopped. "There is a second interruption," he said. "Not in the engine bay. Behind the instrument panel." One engineer frowned. That would explain why the diagnostics kept looping. Another whispered, and why the replacement electronic control units never responded correctly. Charlotte looked at Grant. Why was this never inspected? Grant's answer came a fraction too late. Because there was no reason to inspect it. Ethan did not look away from the drawings. There is always a reason when a machine refuses to lie. Charlotte asked for the archival interior schematics. Grant said they were unavailable. Charlotte asked again. This time her voice carried the weight of ownership, grief, and growing suspicion. The files appeared on the main screen within seconds. Lines of technical history filled the wall, and there, buried in a faded revision note from 5 years earlier, was a technician authorization linked to a restricted modification. The initials were not Henry Miller's. They were not Richard Whitmore's. Grant stepped back before anyone accused him of anything, and that was when everyone noticed. Lily noticed. First. Children often see fear before adults agree to name it. She looked at her father through the glass and whispered, though he could not hear her. Daddy, he knows. Ethan's eyes remained on the screen, his face still, his voice low. Ms. Whitmore, I think your father's car has been protecting a secret. And I think someone in this room has spent 5 years hoping it would never start again. Charlotte did not ask Grant another question in front of the engineers. She had learned that people who hide behind procedure often become careless when they believe the room is still on their side. Instead, she closed the service screen, turned to Ethan, and said quietly, Come with me. Ethan glanced toward Lily behind the observation glass. Charlotte followed his eyes. She can come too. Grant stepped forward. Charlotte, this is highly irregular. She looked back at him once. So is 5 years of failure. The hallway beyond the restoration bay was warmer and darker, lined with framed photographs of Whitmore Motors through the decades, ribbon cuttings, factory openings, charity galas, race victories, men in suits shaking hands beside machines built by men whose names never made the wall. Lily walked close to Ethan, holding her notebook against her chest. Daddy, she whispered, are we in trouble? Ethan shook his head. No, sweetheart. We are in history. Charlotte heard him and said nothing, but the words stayed with her as she unlocked a freight elevator with a black keycard. It carried them down 3 floors beneath the public showroom, into the old archive level her father had once called the basement of forgotten miracles. The doors opened to a long storage room filled with metal cabinets, covered engines, wooden crates, and the quiet smell of dust, paper, and machine oil. Charlotte went straight to a row marked Private Restoration Projects, while Ethan stood still, taking in the place like a church built for labor instead of worship. My father kept everything, Charlotte said. Invoices, letters, sketches, voice notes. I used to think it was clutter. Ethan answered softly. Some men save proof because they know someday truth will need help. Charlotte pulled out a gray file box labeled Project Rosso, then another marked Whitmore Miller Prototype Ignition. Her hand paused on the second label. Miller. Not as a visitor. Not as a contractor buried in a note. As a partner. She set the box on the table and opened it. Inside were photographs of Richard Whitmore and Henry Miller standing shoulder to shoulder beside the Ferrari when its body was bare metal and its engine bay was open to the light. Henry was younger than Ethan remembered from the last years, but the same steadiness lived in his face. Richard had one arm around him, laughing like he trusted him completely. Lily leaned over the table. That is Grandpa. Ethan swallowed once. Yes. Charlotte found a handwritten letter beneath the photographs. Her father's script filled the page, bold and impatient. Henry understands this car better than any certified team I have hired. He hears what numbers miss. If anything happens to me, the final ignition sequence must stay with him, because trust is not a title, it is a man. Charlotte read the last sentence twice, and the steel she had worn for years began to crack in silence. I never saw this, she whispered. Ethan looked at the page but did not touch it. My father was accused of taking money from your company after your father died. He lost clients. He lost his shop. He kept saying the truth was in the car, but nobody with power listened. Charlotte closed her eyes. The shame did not arrive loudly. It arrived with weight. The kind a decent person feels when they realize their comfort had rested on someone else's erased name. She opened the second folder. There were legal memos, internal complaints, and one unsigned allegation claiming Henry had sabotaged the vehicle to force a private payout. The allegation had triggered the end of his reputation. Ethan's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. He died with neighbors thinking he was a thief. Lily reached for his hand. Charlotte turned another page, then froze. Attached to the allegation was an internal review signed by Mason Holloway, former technical director of Whitmore Motors, Grant Holloway's father. The room felt quiet enough to hear the old air system click above them. Charlotte whispered. Mason Holloway ran the investigation. Ethan nodded slowly, the pieces aligning with a sorrow that felt older than anger. And his son now controls the service history. Lily pointed to a small cassette recorder tucked inside the box, labeled Richard, final calibration note. Charlotte pressed play with a trembling thumb. Static filled the room, then Richard Whitmore's voice emerged, warm, tired, unmistakably alive. Henry, if you are hearing this, it means I did not get the chance to say it in person. You were right about the bypass. Someone inside the company changed the circuit. I am taking the car off the books until we know who. Charlotte covered her mouth with one hand. Ethan stared at the recorder, as if his father had just been given breath through another man's memory. The tape crackled again. And Henry, whatever happens, do not let them make you small. You built the heart of this machine. For a long moment, nobody moved. Not Charlotte. Not Ethan. Not Lily. In that basement of forgotten miracles, surrounded by dust and proof, two families who had been separated by silence finally stood on the same side of the truth. By dawn, Charlotte Whitmore had made a decision that no board member, attorney, or public relations advisor would have approved if she had given them the chance. She did not send a memo. She did not schedule a private inquiry. She did not allow Grant Holloway time to bury one more document beneath polished language. Instead, she called an emergency board demonstration for 11 o'clock and required every senior executive, every restoration engineer, and every legal officer connected to the Ferrari project to attend in person. By 10:45, the main showroom had been transformed into a quiet arena of wealth and suspicion. The red Ferrari sat beneath the glass ceiling, its paint catching the winter light like a sealed flame. Rows of black chairs faced the platform. Cameras from the internal communications team stood near the back wall. Board members whispered into each other's ears, checking their watches, adjusting cufflinks, wondering whether their CEO had finally let grief become strategy. Ethan stood near the car in his denim jacket, his father's drawing secured inside a clear sleeve on the service cart. Lily sat in the front row beside Charlotte's assistant, both hands wrapped around a paper cup of hot chocolate she was too nervous to drink. Grant entered last, wearing a charcoal suit and the kind of smile that told everyone he believed the room still belonged to him. This is unnecessary, he said to Charlotte, soft enough to sound reasonable and loud enough for others to hear. If you wanted another public failure, you could have simply asked. Charlotte looked at him without blinking. I am asking for the truth. Grant gave a small laugh. From him? He nodded toward Ethan. A local mechanic with sentimental drawings? Ethan did not respond. He had learned from his father that a man does not need to catch every insult thrown his way. Some can fall to the floor and show people who threw them. Charlotte stepped onto the platform. Her voice carried through the showroom, calm and clean. For 5 years, this vehicle has been presented to this company as a technical impossibility. Today, Mr. Ethan Miller will attempt to identify the source of that impossibility in full view of this board. A gray-haired director leaned forward. And if he fails? Grant answered before Charlotte could. Then we acknowledge what many of us already know. This obsession has damaged leadership confidence, delayed product initiatives, and turned a family keepsake into a corporate liability. A few board members shifted uncomfortably. Charlotte's face did not move, but Ethan saw her hand close once at her side, then open. Grace under pressure. Pain under control. Lily leaned toward Charlotte's assistant and whispered, Is my daddy in trouble if the car does not start? Ethan heard her from the platform because fathers hear their children through walls, crowds, and fear. He turned just enough to meet her eyes. I am all right, Lily. Are you scared? She asked, her voice small in the wide expensive room. Ethan looked at the Ferrari, then at the board, then at Grant. Only of becoming the kind of man who stays quiet when truth needs help. The showroom fell still. Charlotte lowered her eyes for 1 second, not to hide weakness, but to hold herself steady. Then Ethan walked to the service cart, took out the old drawing, the archived schematic, and the printed service records from the past 5 years. Grant's smile began to fade. Mr. Miller, he said, sharper now. This is a mechanical demonstration, not a courtroom. Ethan placed the papers beneath the overhead camera connected to the main wall screen. Then the machine can testify. A murmur moved through the room. Charlotte turned to the technician at the media station. Put it on the screen. The image appeared 30 feet wide, Henry Miller's blue pencil design beside the official Whitmore schematic, beside Lily's notebook drawing of the hidden bypass. The three images aligned almost perfectly. Ethan did not touch the ignition. He did not even open the driver's door. Instead, he faced the board and pointed to the 5-year service timeline. "Before anyone asks this car to speak," he said, "you need to see who taught it to stay silent." Grant took one step forward, then stopped when Charlotte looked at him. The room seemed to hold its breath, not because the Ferrari was about to start, but because the truth had already begun. Ethan let the first service record fill the wall, and the room saw what 5 years of polished reports had tried to hide. The first failed repair had replaced the fuel pump. The second blamed the starter system. The third blamed the electronic control unit. The fourth blamed a factory defect that did not exist. Each report had different signatures, different language, different excuses, but all of them passed through one authorization chain before they were archived. Grant Holloway's department. Ethan pointed to the dates, his voice low and steady. Every time someone got close to the ignition pathway, the inspection was redirected. A board member frowned. Redirected by whom? Ethan tapped the screen once. The approvals are here. Grant laughed, but it sounded thin now. Approvals are not proof of wrongdoing. They are procedure. Ethan nodded. That is what makes them useful. Procedure leaves footprints. Charlotte stood beside the platform, still as a statue, while the winter light poured over her shoulders and made her look less like an executive defending a company and more like a daughter standing at the edge of a grave, waiting for someone to tell her whether love had been lied to. Ethan pulled up the archived schematic from Richard Whitmore's private file, then overlaid Henry Miller's hand-drawn design. The room watched the two images line up, the custom ignition path, the protected relay, the narrow bypass hidden behind the instrument panel. Then he added the current skin from the Ferrari. One bright red interruption appeared in the wrong place. A quiet gasp came from the second row. One engineer stood without realizing it. That bypass was added after the original build. Ethan nodded. Yes. Grant stepped forward. Or it was added by Henry Miller when he tampered with the car. The sentence landed like a stain. Lily's face flushed in the front row, but Ethan did not turn angry. He turned clear. No, he said. Grant's eyes hardened. You are a mechanic, Mr. Miller. Not an investigator. Ethan looked at him for the first time with the full weight of his silence behind his eyes. I am the son of the man your family buried. The showroom went utterly still. Even the cameras seemed too loud. Charlotte's lips parted, but no words came. Ethan walked to the service cart and lifted the small connector he had removed from the hidden line, sealed now in a clear evidence pouch. This part was manufactured 3 years after my father died. No one moved. Henry Miller could not have installed it. Richard Whitmore could not have approved it. But someone used their names to make a lie look old. Grant looked toward the legal officer, then toward the board, searching for shelter in faces that had already begun to close. Charlotte turned to the media technician. Play the archive audio. Grant's voice rose. Charlotte, that file has not been authenticated. She did not look at him. Then let everyone hear why you are afraid of it. The technician pressed play. Static washed through the showroom, and then Richard Whitmore's voice filled the glass room, warm, tired, alive across time. Henry, you were right. About the bypass. Someone inside the company changed the circuit. I am taking the car off the books until we know who. Do not let them make you small. You built the heart of this machine. Charlotte closed her eyes as if the voice had reached through 5 years and touched her shoulder. Lily gripped the edge of her seat. Ethan lowered his head for one breath, not in defeat, but in honor. Then he opened the driver's door. The leather creaked softly. He reached beneath the panel, removed the false bypass, and replaced the missing link with the small hand-built piece his father had wrapped in cloth and left among old drawings, never knowing whether his son would one day need it. The room watched a working man restore what powerful men had hidden. Ethan slid into the driver's seat and held the key. 1 second passed. 2. 3. He turned it. For a heartbeat, there was nothing but silence, the kind that tests faith before grace arrives. Then the Ferrari awakened. The engine roared through the showroom, deep and clean and alive, shaking dust from memory itself. No one cheered. No one dared. Charlotte covered her mouth, tears bright in her eyes. Grant stood frozen under the same lights where he had mocked a man with a toolbox. Ethan shut the engine off gently, and the final echo rolled across the marble like a verdict. The Ferrari had spoken, and every proud mouth in the room had gone silent. For several seconds after the engine faded, no one inside the showroom moved. The silence was not empty anymore. It was full of every insult swallowed, every truth delayed, every honest name erased because someone powerful had found it convenient. Ethan stepped out of the Ferrari and closed the door with the same care he would have used on a customer's old pickup, because respect was not something he saved for expensive things. Charlotte walked toward him slowly, past the board members, past the engineers, past Grant Holloway, whose face had lost all its practiced certainty. "Mr. Holloway," she said, her voice steady enough to make the room straighten. "You are suspended from all company duties effective immediately pending a full independent review." Grant opened his mouth, then closed it when the legal officer stood and nodded. There are moments when pride looks for a door and finds only consequence. Two security staff members approached, not with drama, not with cruelty, but with procedure, and Grant left the showroom without another joke to hide behind. No one followed him with their eyes for long. The room had already turned back to Ethan. Charlotte faced the board. "Henry Miller's name will be restored in our company records today. A public statement will be issued before 5 o'clock. His contribution to this vehicle and to my father's final restoration project will be recognized permanently." One director began to speak, but Charlotte raised a hand. "Not negotiated. Corrected." Ethan looked down at Lily in the front row. She was crying quietly, trying to wipe her cheeks before anyone saw. He crossed the floor and knelt in front of her. "Hey," he whispered. "You all right?" She nodded, but her voice trembled. "Grandpa was not bad." Ethan's eyes softened. "No, sweetheart. He never was." Lily threw her arms around his neck, and Ethan held her in the middle of the most expensive room he had ever entered, surrounded by people who finally understood that dignity does not arrive in a tailored suit. Sometimes it comes wearing work boots, carrying an old drawing, holding a child's hand. Later that afternoon, Charlotte brought Ethan and Lily to the Heritage Gallery on the west side of the building. The room displayed the company's proudest machines beneath soft lights, each with a brass plate naming designers, founders, and executives. At the center stood an empty space where the Ferrari would soon rest when it was not being driven. Charlotte held a new temporary plaque in her hands. "Richard Whitmore and Henry Miller, Final Restoration Partners." Ethan read it once. Then again. His throat tightened, but he did not look away. Charlotte said, "I am sorry my family's company allowed your father to carry shame that never belonged to him." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. "An apology cannot give him those years back." "I know. But truth can still reach where people could not." Charlotte nodded, and the grace in that moment did not need decoration. She offered Ethan a position leading a new restoration division, with full authority, full credit, and a salary that made Lily's eyes widen when she heard it. Ethan almost smiled. "I will consider it." Charlotte seemed surprised. "Most people would say yes before I finished the sentence." Ethan looked through the glass wall toward the Ferrari, now resting under warmer light. "Most people are not trying to teach a daughter that worth and money are not the same thing." Lily slipped her hand into his. Charlotte's expression changed, not from power to weakness, but from armor to something human. "Then what do you want first?" Ethan looked at the plaque. "I want his name engraved for real. Not as a footnote. Not as a correction. Beside your father's." Charlotte answered without hesitation. "Done." 2 weeks later, the Ferrari drove for the first time on a quiet Sunday road north of Columbus, past bare trees, frozen fields, and farmhouses with smoke rising from their chimneys. Ethan drove with both hands steady on the wheel. Lily sat beside him, smiling so wide the winter could not touch her. Charlotte rode in the back, not as a CEO guarding an asset, but as a daughter listening to her father's memory finally breathe. No one spoke for a while. The engine did the talking, smooth and honest, carrying 2 family names through the morning light. And somewhere between the hum of the road and the grace of second chances, Ethan understood what his father had known all along. A good man does not need to shout to be remembered. He only needs the truth to start.